The night was cold, the kind of bitter chill that crept through the layers of clothing and settled deep into the bones. A light drizzle fell from the dark sky, making the pavement slick and the air heavy with dampness. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting a dim glow over the nearly empty sidewalk. Daniel sat on an old milk crate, his worn guitar resting against his knee. His fingers, stiff from the cold, strummed the strings with a quiet, melancholic rhythm. He wasn't playing for anyone. No one had stopped to listen all evening. A few people hurried past, their heads down, coats pulled tight against the wind. No one looked his way. No one dropped a few coins into the open guitar case in front of him. It was just another night. With a sigh, Daniel let the last note fade into the air. He flexed his fingers, trying to rub warmth back into them, then reached down to pack up his things. That's when he saw it, a dark shape, curled up near the base of a crumbling brick wall across the street. He squinted through the dim light, his breath hitching slightly. The figure was small, unmoving, just a shadow against the cold, wet concrete. Curiosity and something deeper concern urged him to stand. Slipping his guitar into its case, he slung it over his shoulder and crossed the empty street. As he drew closer, his stomach twisted. It was a dog, a German shepherd, thin to the point of emaciation. Its fur was soaked through, clinging to its bony frame. Mud caked its paws, and its ears, though naturally alert, drooped slightly with exhaustion. Daniel hesitated. The dog's eyes flickered open, glassy and full of something raw. Fear, wariness, but also a quiet resignation. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without thinking, Daniel shrugged off his tattered old jacket and crouched down, gently draping it over the dog's shivering body. The dog flinched, but didn't run. It didn't have the energy to. From behind him, a voice scoffed. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Daniel turned to see a man standing a few feet away, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. The stranger glanced at the dog with a look of disdain. "Strays can be dangerous. You don't know where it's been." Daniel ignored him. Instead, he reached into his bag, pulling out a thin blanket, the only one he had. He spread it on the ground beside the dog and patted it lightly. "If you want," he said softly, "you can sleep here." The dog didn't move at first. Its body remained tense, as if expecting the worst. Then, after a long, agonizing pause, it shifted. Carefully, warily, it stepped onto the blanket. It lowered itself slowly, curling into a tight ball, the weight of exhaustion winning over fear. Daniel exhaled, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He sat down beside the dog, pulled his guitar back onto his lap, and began to strum once more. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. Daniel's tiny rented room was nothing more than a cramped space in the back of an old boarding house, but it was dry and warm, two things the streets could never offer. As he pushed open the door, Max hesitated at the threshold. His paws hovered over the step, his body tense, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room as if expecting a trap. Daniel knelt, keeping his movements slow. "It's okay, buddy," he said softly. "No one's gonna hurt you." Still, Max didn't move. With a sigh, Daniel stood and walked further inside, giving the dog space to decide. He set his guitar down, kicked off his shoes, and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich from earlier. The smell of food must have reached Max because a quiet whine slipped from his throat. Daniel took a piece of bread, tore it into smaller chunks, and placed them on the floor before stepping back. Max eyed him warily. He sniffed the air but didn't move forward. Only when Daniel turned away, pretending not to look, did the dog inch forward, his movements slow and cautious. He devoured the food in seconds. Daniel smiled to himself. "You've been on your own for a while, huh?" That first night was rough. Max didn't settle easily. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the window, sent him snapping his head up, ears perked, body rigid. He never fully lay down, just curled himself into a tight ball in the corner, eyes half-lidded but always watching. Daniel let him be. Trust took time. The next few days followed the same pattern. Max ate only when Daniel moved to the other side of the room. He never got too close, never let Daniel touch him, but he stayed. That was enough. Then, one night, Daniel was jolted awake by a sound that made his heart clench. A whimper. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and turned toward the corner where Max usually rested. The dog was curled even tighter than usual, his paws twitching, his breaths coming in sharp, panicked bursts. Low, pained whimpers escaped his throat, his body shaking. A nightmare. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that didn't fade just because you'd escaped whatever caused it. Slowly, carefully, he slid off his mattress and moved toward Max. He kept his voice soft, low. "Hey, buddy, you're okay." Max's legs jerked as if he were running in his sleep. His breath hitched. Daniel hesitated for a second, then gently placed his hand on Max's trembling back. The dog stiffened at the touch, but he didn't bolt. Daniel let out a slow breath, his fingers brushing lightly through the matted fur. "You're safe," he murmured. "No one's going to hurt you." The tension in Max's body didn't disappear, but after a long moment his breathing steadied, the whimpers quieted, and for the first time, Max didn't run when Daniel touched him. That night, for the first time since bringing him home, Max fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, and for the first time Daniel knew Max was starting to trust him. The days turned into weeks, and little by little, something remarkable happened. Max changed. At first it was subtle. He started eating without waiting for Daniel to move away. He no longer flinched at sudden noises, and sometimes, just sometimes, he let his tail wag, even if only for a second. Then came the morning when Daniel picked up his guitar, slung it over his shoulder, and turned to leave for the day, and Max followed. Daniel paused at the door, raising an eyebrow. "You want to come with me, buddy?" Max didn't move, but his eyes never left Daniel's. Daniel smiled. "All right then." From that day forward, Max was always by his side. They became a familiar sight on the street corner. Daniel strumming his guitar, and Max curled up beside him on the old blanket. Sometimes, Max would tilt his head at the music, ears twitching as if he were listening to every note. Other times he simply lay there, soaking up the sunlight, looking more content than he had in a long time. People noticed. Strangers who had once walked past without a second glance now stopped, some to listen, some to drop a few extra bills into Daniel's case. But most of them stopped for Max. Children would giggle and point. Elderly passers-by would smile, commenting on how the good boy found his home. Some even knelt to offer a gentle scratch behind his ears. And Max? He let them. He was learning that not all people were cruel, but not everyone who walked the streets had kindness in their hearts. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the buildings in golden hues, Daniel played his final song of the day. The notes lingered in the cool air as he reached to gather the scattered bills and coins from his open guitar case. That's when he heard the voice. "Ugh, this damn noise again!" Daniel barely had time to react before a booted foot swung forward, knocking over his small collection of earnings. Coins clattered onto the pavement. A few bills fluttered away in the breeze. A man, clearly drunk, sneered down at him. His breath reeked of alcohol, his eyes unfocused. "You think people actually want to hear that crap?" he slurred, swaying slightly. Daniel tensed, but didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that arguing with drunks never ended well. He bent down, reaching for the scattered money. The man stepped forward again, this time toward Daniel, and that was when Max moved. A deep, guttural growl cut through the air, freezing the man in place. Max had risen to his feet, his body tense, ears flattened, his teeth bare just enough to send a clear message. "Back off!" The man cursed under his breath and took an uneasy step backward. He glared at Daniel, then at Max, before stumbling away down the street. Silence stretched between them as Daniel stared at Max, his heart still pounding. Then he exhaled a soft laugh, shaking his head. "Well, I guess that settles it." Max tilted his head. Daniel reached out hesitantly, running a hand over the thick fur at the scruff of his neck. "For the record," he murmured, his voice filled with something warm, something unspoken, "I would have been fine." Max huffed, his tail giving the smallest wag. Daniel let out a breath, his fingers curling gently into Max's fur. Then, for the first time, he pulled him into a firm embrace. "You and me," he whispered. "We are a team, right?" Max didn't pull away, and in that moment, Daniel knew he had found more than just a stray dog. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries as Daniel strummed his guitar outside the small cafe on the corner of 7th Street. It had been weeks since the cafe owner, a kind woman named Margaret, had approached him with an offer. "I see you and your dog playing every day," she had said with a smile. "Why don't you perform in front of my cafe? You bring in customers, and I'll make sure you and your pup never go hungry." It wasn't much, but to Daniel it was everything. A small spot to call his own, a regular place to play where people actually listened. And Max? He thrived. The once fearful German shepherd now lay calmly beside Daniel as he played, his large paws stretched out, his ears flicking at the sound of the guitar. He had become somewhat of a local celebrity. People stopped by just to see him. Some brought treats, others knelt to scratch behind his ears. But Max's favorite thing was the music. Whenever Daniel played, Max would lift his head, his tail thumping against the ground, sometimes even letting out a soft huff, as if keeping rhythm. It was impossible not to smile when watching them together. Then, one afternoon, something happened that neither of them could have expected. Daniel was in the middle of a song, fingers moving effortlessly over the guitar strings, eyes half closed as he got lost in the melody. He didn't notice the man standing a few feet away, watching intently. The stranger remained still, hands tucked into the pockets of his tailored coat, listening to every note as if hearing something special. Max noticed first. His ears perked and he gave a quiet, curious huff. Daniel, finishing his song, finally looked up. His gaze met the man's, a sharp-eyed figure, older, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. As Daniel lowered his guitar, the man stepped forward. "That was incredible," he said simply. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Thanks." The man studied him for a moment before extending his hand. "My name's James Carter. I'm a music producer." Daniel's breath hitched. He didn't move, didn't speak. It was as if the world had paused. James chuckled at his stunned expression. "I've been listening to you for a while now. There's something real in your music. Something people need to hear." He nodded toward Max. "And this guy here, he makes it even better." Daniel swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "I think we should talk," James continued, "about taking your music somewhere bigger." A rush of disbelief, excitement, and fear surged through Daniel all at once. Was this real? Was this actually happening? He looked down at Max, who was watching him with calm, steady eyes. As if he knew, as if this had been meant to happen all along. Daniel exhaled, his fingers tightening around the guitar. Then, slowly, Max's tail began to wag. Daniel smiled. Yeah, maybe it was fate after all. The recording studio was nothing like the streets Daniel was used to. Instead of the open sky and the distant hum of the city, he was surrounded by thick, soundproof walls, expensive equipment, and people who actually believed in his music. It felt surreal. James had set up a trial recording session just to see how Daniel's voice and guitar translated in a professional setting. It was an opportunity most street musicians could only dream of, but there was a problem. Max wasn't allowed inside. Daniel stood at the entrance, gripping the strap of his guitar case, glancing down at his loyal companion. Max sat beside him, ears perked but tail still, sensing the hesitation in his owner. A studio assistant smiled apologetically. "I'm really sorry, man. No pets allowed in the booth." Daniel hesitated. He had never left Max alone, not since the night they met. The idea of walking into that room, closing the door, and leaving Max on the other side made his stomach twist. Max had been abandoned once before. Daniel never wanted him to feel that way again. He knelt down, resting a hand on Max's back. "You okay to wait here, bud?" he asked softly. Max huffed, tilting his head. Daniel exhaled, forcing himself to stand. "All right, I won't be long." With a final, reluctant glance, he stepped inside the studio. The heavy door swung shut behind him, sealing Max out. Daniel's heart ached at the thought. But then, something amazing happened. As he strummed his first chord and his voice filled the room, the sound engineer chuckled. "Look at that!" Daniel frowned and turned toward the glass window, separating the booth from the rest of the studio. There, just outside the door, Max was sitting calmly, ears flicking with interest, and his tail? It was wagging, not just wagging, but thumping against the floor, keeping perfect time with the rhythm of the song. The entire room burst into laughter. James shook his head, grinning. "I swear that dog's got better rhythm than half the musicians I've worked with." Daniel laughed too, warmth flooding through him. Max wasn't anxious, he wasn't abandoned, he was listening, feeling the music just like he always had. And in that moment Daniel knew Max had never been just a dog, he was part of the story. James clapped Daniel on the back as the song ended. "I've got an idea," he said. "We're putting both of you on the album cover. This isn't just about the music, it's about you two." Daniel looked through the glass again. Max met his gaze. His tail wagged harder. And just like that, Daniel realized he and Max weren't just a street act anymore. They were something more, something bigger. They were a story worth telling. 1 year later, Daniel stood on a small stage in a cozy, packed venue. The warm glow of string lights overhead cast soft shadows across the room, and the quiet murmur of anticipation filled the air. His fingers rested lightly on his guitar, the same one he had played on the streets, though now its worn body carried the marks of countless performances. At his feet, curled up comfortably on an old familiar blanket, was Max. A low chuckle rippled through the audience as they noticed the dog, his ears flicking lazily at the sound of the crowd. Someone up front whispered, "There's the famous pup." Daniel smiled. He adjusted the mic, glancing down at his best friend before looking out at the audience. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I was playing guitar on a cold sidewalk, wondering if anyone even heard me." A pause. He glanced down again, running his fingers briefly through Max's fur. "And then, one night, I met this guy. He was cold, hungry, and alone." His voice softened, "Kind of like me." A few murmurs of understanding spread through the crowd. "I gave him my blanket," Daniel continued, "and I thought I was helping him." He let out a quiet laugh. "But the truth is, he saved me just as much as I saved him." His tail thumped once. Daniel strummed a soft chord. "This song is for him, and for anyone who's ever felt lost, until someone showed them kindness." The audience fell silent as Daniel began to play. And there, in that moment, the street musician and the stray dog were exactly where they were meant to be. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is a single act of kindness, a warm blanket on a cold night, a friend when you need one most, and the belief that no one is ever truly alone. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness has the power to change lives, both human and animal alike. Daniel and Max's journey began with a single act of compassion, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can lead to the most incredible transformations. Who knows? Maybe there's a stray out there waiting for someone like you to notice them. If you love heartwarming rescue stories like this, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories for more incredible tales of love, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between people and their furry companions. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.